Hi, everybody. Okay, welcome to our deep dive session for March. It's a really exciting session. This month we're focused on the people and service toolkit, and we're diving into the topic of what makes a great workplace. We've got a really special and fantastic feature and guest with us today. So I'm so excited to be introducing Meg Scott. Meg Scott is an incredible, very experienced competitive barista and has spent so much time managing cafe environments. Currently, she's the general manager of the coffee movement out in California and San Francisco, and also is currently coaching a couple additional barista competitors. And when she's not busy running the shop and running cafes, she's always involved in competitions, whether it's coaching or judging throwdowns or competing, and has placed twice in the U.S. Barista Championship finals, which is so exciting. And if you want to follow along with Meg's adventures, follow her at Coffee with Megatron. Thank you for being here, Meg. We are so grateful and can't wait to learn from you.
Awesome. I'm super excited to be here. This is definitely like a subject that's near and dear to my heart. And so when I was asked by you guys, I was like, oh my God, yes, I love this. I guess let's just dive right in. So I have a deep dive agenda for us today. And so I feel like it's, stuff that we sometimes don't even realize we're doing, hospitality and bar flow. So basically, we'll be talking about like how to work protocol into place that makes things easier on us, whether that's creating a bar flow that's ergonomic to avoid physical burnout, or having like a thoughtful guest experience to avoid like confusion or disgruntled guests. Just like trying to make it easier for everyone to leave super happy, including baristas and guests alike. And then we'll talk a little bit about promoting open communication. And so I feel like this slide I definitely have is a little smaller, but I think it's also like it kind of echoes throughout everything. It's just like while we're managing the cafe, while we're doing hospitality, it's like it's so important that clear communication is happening. And so we'll kind of go over like the basics, and then we'll be diving into the other categories about how that open communication is helpful for everything. And then next we'll go into managing a cafe space. So like what goes into running a cafe? Like how do we prioritize what we do? How do we hire? How do we lead by example? It's definitely like there's so many moving parts to managing a cafe. And so I kind of just tried to go over like which ones are the most important, and those will be the ones that we'll go through. And then this one's definitely not a very long one, but we'll talk a little bit about like how important it is to like make sure we're having like a fun work environment. I feel like since we're here, coffee is probably fun for us because we're coffee professionals. But I think it's just like talking about like achieving that flow state with your team and just like having a good time and not getting too stressed. Because even though coffee is really important, it is just coffee in the end. And then obviously at the end, we can have any questions you guys have, but I would love to kind of hear from y'all and just like, what's the most successful thing that you have encountered while being in the cafe? And that can be as a barista or as a manager or as an owner, and just like something that's kind of stuck with you. Because I feel like so much of this knowledge, as I was talking to Ivana, and I was like, so much of this knowledge is like passed down to me. It's just like it's not like I was like looking for sources and stuff, and I was like, so much of this is who has made an impact on me and been able to like say something that resonates with me that I've then been able to pass down to my baristas as well. So definitely kind of like a fun little question we can have at the end, in addition to any other questions you guys have. Okay, So, first things first, my two favorite things, hospitality and bar flow. I love yapping and I love making coffee. And so these I wanted to start with is kind of, I think these are also the things that take up most of our day as well, when we're in the cafe. Um, and so as Ivana said, I've done some barista competitions and stuff like that. And I think that's been a huge influence in my life as a hospitality professional and also a barista. Um, and so I was going to start just with this little fun video. I forgot to get a link for you guys, but I hope you can see it. It's just kind of like, I feel like it gives you a good idea of like how much you like want to work in a line when you're doing competition. And I think that's so important in the cafe as well. So it's kind of just like a fun, this looks a little chaotic because it's fast, but I feel like this is a good example of like from start to finish, left to right. That's kind of like what we're trying to accomplish when we're on the bar. Um, okay, and so these are some things that are specific competition, but we're going to go a little bit deep dive into hospitality a little bit more as well. Let me bring my notes up. um, so kind of some things that I learned is like leading the guest through the experience. When you're coming up with a routine for competition, you're trying to think about like the most efficient and way to communicate your information about your coffee. And so you're like literally thinking about a score sheet. So when we're in the cafe, we're not really thinking about that, but thinking about that experience and being like, okay, I need to make sure the judges have everything. Like I'm going to refill their waters when they're low, like being intuitive about that, making sure they have a napkin, stirring their espresso for them so they get a like fully incorporated drink. Um, and just like you want to make sure that they never think why or what's next. And I feel like that's actually super applicable to the cafe as well. Is just like you don't want people to be walking away with a pastry with no napkin. And so it's like we can take that to kind of like the next level by really trying to think about that experience. Um, and then I wrote like giving the energy that you want, and definitely it's the judges are definitely probably the best people you want to serve coffee to, like they're coffee professionals, they're awesome, they're so attentive, they've been trained and calibrated. So it definitely is like a higher level of judge than like our general like than the people who are coming into our cafe. But I think is just like keeping that mindset of like this is the guest that I want to serve and giving kind of the energy that you want, like always making sure you greet them so they're not waiting there. But I feel like when you choreograph your routine so much to like involve smiling and warmness, and so I think that's something that like is really important to bring into the cafe as well. And this is basically just stuff that I like specifically I think learned a lot from competition, and we have another hospitality slide that we'll dive deep in as well. um One of the best parts about competition was intentionality of movements. And so I feel like I used to be a very chaotic barista, and it kind of being like, okay, how do I get to the end goal as fast as possible? And I feel like when you're intentional, you actually don't have to move like a maniac. You can actually be really intentional, make sure every step counts along the way as well. And I think that was something that was really important that I learned during competition. Um, and I was going to say a good example of this is like if you're steaming milk, but you're in a hurry and you're multitasking, and then you haven't aerated enough, and then you get to 90 degrees. So now, if you aerate, you're going to have bubbly milk no matter if you have a vortex. And I feel like that's kind of like a good example of like intentionality where you're like, okay, I'm going to just concentrate just for like these 5 seconds on this aeration. And then I will be in the perfect vortex, and then I can do this next multitasking thing. So that kind of like mindset where you're like, okay, I'm going to be intentional so I can prioritize quality control and then do the next thing that I have to do, because it's going to save you remaking drinks and things like that as well. Um, we all know we got to crush the rush. And so it definitely feels like we have to rush sometimes. But I feel like that kind of goes into like the intentionality of movements. It's just like if you're not rushing, there will be less mistakes, less spills, less QC issues, and it also allows you to be more present, I think, in the moment as well, and maintaining that high quality. And so that's something I definitely, on weekends at the coffee movement, we have a crazy line out the door. And the more experienced you get, the less you think about that line. You know what I mean? And so it kind of is like, once that just becomes like a mindset and you're like, I'm always ready for the rush, you never really actually have to be in a rush. And then another thing was how to work in a line. And that's something that I definitely had mentors teach me a lot about, especially because there at when I worked at Equator, there was a food program. So we also had to do like prep work, kitchen prep work and stuff. And working in a line with that like made so much sense. And then applying that to your bar flow will only help you be more efficient, take less unnecessary steps, and also make sure that it's more of like a team effort as well. It's going to reduce burnout, and wear and tear on yourself and your baristas by working in a line. And then I said communicating clearly, and my note literally says competition communication is weird AF, because it's like a TED talk, and you want it to be, you're like, okay, how can I say this in like a interesting way, but not too long, but not too short, but get the point across so that it's really, really clear. And it's like a lot of us have probably seen some coffee competitions where they're like, all right, now I'm going to have you stir your espresso from front to back 14 times. And so it's just like those types of things is like you're trying to make it as clear as possible. And the clearer you are with your guest, the easier it is to figure out what they actually want. And so they leave with a drink that they're happy about. And then this is kind of just a theme, smiling and eye contact definitely go a long way. When I choreograph a little bit of like the eye contact, like when I'm on the stage. And so I'm like, I want to make sure I connect with each of my judges equally. And I feel like that's honestly a good thing to apply to the cafe, because it's like, a lot of times we have regulars that come in. We're so familiar with them, super easy just to like dive right into conversation and chat them up. And then the next person walks up, they've never been in before, and they don't get that same attention, And so trying to utilize that so that it's going as well. Okay. Any questions about that?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that as someone who's gotten to judge you in my life, everything you're saying is like very true. And also, you're very good at it. And I feel really lucky that we get to hear this from you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You're also very fun to have it as a judge. Okay, so this is kind of a little bit more like, this is hospitality, but a little bit more specific to the cafe, so a little bit more relevant. And so, hang on, let me bring my notes up. And so kind of going off of the thing I just said, like we've all been to a cafe where maybe we felt a little bit intimidated or like a little bit scared we don't fit in. And so it's really important that like we are a community hub, And so you want to make the neighborhood and new guests feel welcome. We play a really small but like pivotal part in our guests' lives and our baristas as well. And so we want to be good neighbors. We want to make sure that like once someone comes in, that they feel welcome, especially because I feel like a lot of specialty coffee spaces end up in like old neighborhoods where there's like really established businesses and things like that. And so it's important to come in and be able to like bond with those people in your community. And then kind of going off of the competition stuff is just like intentional guest experience. And so it's really important to think as the customer. And so a lot of times, like for my leads and managers, like I always tell them, I'm like, if it's slow, like come out behind the bar and just like see what's going on with the whole bar flow. And I feel like thinking like the guest will help you figure out like if you're missing something, if something is a little bit confusing. And so really trying to make it be like, okay, I'm thinking like the guest from start to finish. And I feel like there's a lot of times where we don't have much say in the space that we have, especially like I feel like San Francisco is honestly a good example because it's just like little tiny long narrow spaces. And so you don't always get to be like, okay, I have the perfect bar, it's going to flow perfect from left to right, it's going to make so much sense. And I feel like our first cafe is a really good example of that. It's like we started off really small, and so it wasn't made for super high volume, and now we're a little bit more high volume. And so our guest experience has to be kind of like we have to lead them through it so that they know where they're going. And so knowing if you do have one of those spaces where it doesn't necessarily make logical sense right away, leading with that like empathy and being like, okay, I am not expecting everybody to know the right thing to do. And I've been there as a nervous customer. And so I want to help them get to that point where they feel comfortable. But yeah, so it's like thinking about like little things like, do they need a sleeve? Do they need sugar? Do they need milk? Do they need a napkin? And just like thinking about those things being incorporated into your bar flow so that when they leave the register or after they've gotten their drink, they're not thinking like, okay, where do I go for these things, And so really trying to make it super intentional so it is organized as well. Having a clear ordering system is also really important, and like having it be structured and trained for your baristas so that they can like recommend drinks to people, and then it also feels like simple. Like a lot of my baristas will, like, if it's the first time people have been there, I always encourage them to ask people, like, do you like something sweet or do you like something strong? And already by that answer, you can eliminate a lot of things. Kind of the same thing as like if they're like, oh, I just want a coffee, first question, do they want milk or do they like it black? Because then that'll help you. It's like, okay, do I do the stronger roast or do I do like the single origin for them today? And so just thinking about that experience is like, and, like, is your menu clear? Can you navigate it? Is it too big? Things like that is just like thinking about like how to guide people through the experience as simple as possible. Kind of going off of the guiding your guests too, that is where a lot of the inspiration from competition comes from, is like, you know, having a bar flow, like we work a little bit like an assembly line. And so communication is really important to people who have never been there before. And just like letting them know, about where they're going next, or like what to expect. Like your drink's going to come out on this side. And it seems little, but it's like these little communications are really helpful and like can ease a lot of anxiety. Because I have been an anxious customer, and I know we have a lot of anxious customers, and so it's important that we're like, okay, like we got this. We'll lead you through this experience. It'll be okay. And then I think, like, honestly, the best thing practice for hospitality is like having that ownership and awareness of your cafe. And so that can be something as like, you see the person that you've already served and you've already given them a drink and they're kind of looking around. Most likely they need a napkin, a water, or a Wi-Fi code. And so like using that like peripheral and being like, okay, like I can see this person coming up, I know what's happening. And learning this task or this skill, I think, is definitely hard to teach right away, because it's really easy just to like hone in on the thing in front of you. And so we'll talk more about this with like developing baristas, but it's definitely something that I want them to feel that like same ownership when I'm not there, and being like, okay, like I see this customer coming up, I got this, I saw this, we'll figure it out. But yeah, I wrote a few different examples. Like while bussing dishes, you offer to someone who like just finished a coffee flight because you're already out there anyway, you know. When pouring a beverage, if you have a fingerprint or a milk smudge, not sludge, if you have milk smudge, you can use a detail towel to wipe it off before serving. Though not everyone is right-handed, I always act like they are. And so if I do like for here stuff, I always make sure that like the spoon handle and the cup handle are facing that way so they can like very easily pick it up and just drink it. Bonus points if you know the lefties and then you serve them the left-handed way. And then kind of I know I said this earlier. It's like if they get a pastry, just automatically giving them a napkin. Like I don't even ask if they have a napkin. I know some people are probably going home that live in the neighborhood, but like I'm gonna give them a napkin anyway. The worst that happens is they're gonna use it for their coffee, you know. And I also make sure not to do like this big a stack of napkins like customers sometimes like to grab. And then this is like next level is like there have been times where like someone is like coughing in line and I can tell they're just like choking on air and I just get them a cup of water and just like hand it to them. And it's like it's better than asking because then they can't really talk while they're coughing or choking. And so you can just kind of like hand it to them too. But it just is like those like little extra mile things, you know, like really being service minded and anticipating the need before it happens. And this honestly like makes it easier on yourself. If you have a really good awareness and you see all these things happening, you can fix the problem before it's even happened. And so it helps you in the end to be that service minded and anticipate that need. Okay. And then I feel like the talking about leading the guest through the experience as well is kind of like is also relevant with the guest experience because I feel like it can apply to standardized training as well. And so making like when you train your baristas, giving them really clear expectations and like giving them those tips, you know, like you see someone choking, or I guess that would be the high maneuver. If you see someone coughing, then you would give them a cup of water and stuff like that. And so giving those like clear ideas and expectations to your baristas is really important because a lot of us have been in this industry for so long, so a lot of these things come super naturally. But it's important that like if you see an opportunity for that, being able to talk to your baristas and be like, this is a really good example of like the type of service we're going for, et cetera, et cetera. And then when they do it on their own too, making sure we're always giving them positive reinforcement. That kind of goes more into developing barista section, but I feel like that's it's really important to have standardized training for your hospitality because every place is different. And so we all offer different things. Some are more involved and some are less involved. And so so it's really clear expectations, it'll help them to be thinking about that service minded. Being service oriented, kind of talking about reading the room. I feel like being service oriented also means tailoring your guest experiences. And so like knowing if someone is in a hurry, if they're in need of a recommendation, like they are looking at the menu and they look really confused. If they're a regular, you know, you can like cut to the chase and be like, all right, just the oat flat white today. And then you can ask how their day is. And so I think that's another thing. It's like being really intuitive. And it's very detail oriented to be thinking that way, but I think it helps in the long run. I have a really big personality and there are definitely times where like, I'm like, I gotta reel it back a little bit for this person. They have not had coffee yet. And so just kind of like that mentality is like, okay, let's meet this person where they're at. And then, sorry, I forgot to put do not disturb on. And then so having boundaries, I think, is important to avoid burnout. And so it's like it's really easy to become kind of like a bartender therapist position with your regulars. But I think it's, you know, knowing that you can take things, not that you take things less personal from disgruntled guests, will only help us take care of ourselves, you know? And it's just like, there are times where like I can tell that like someone kind of got under the skin of one of my employees, and in the end we just kind of talk about, it's just like, you never know what someone else is going through, and while it doesn't excuse that behavior, realizing it really has nothing to do with us, I think is really important. And it helps us compartmentalize a little bit. And also just like, it's being in the service industry, we interact with so many people every day. And I think being able to kind of like let it roll off your back if someone is being a little bit difficult is a really good coping mechanism. Let's see. Oh, and I said, so I wrote, I was like, if someone is acting out, it most likely has nothing to do with us. And if it is coffee related, the easiest thing to do is just remake their drink. Like if they're like, I don't know if this is oat milk, and you are like pretty much sure you made it with oat milk, just that extra mile, just being like, just in case, I'll just remake it, you know? And I feel like that offer um is really important. And I do that, I honestly do that with people who are trying new things as well. um Being like, if you don't like this, let me know, I'll get you something else, because I do think that like we're a specialty coffee shop, so every specialty shop, there's something for everybody, you know? And like it's important that we find something for someone, and that's why we're doing the active listening and also the attention to detail as well. um so as someone who has been in coffee, I've like dedicated my life to coffee at this point. You know, I feel I've been given an opportunity to spread joy in this like crazy world, you know? And so I feel like life is fun, life is short, might as well be nice, you know? Something as simple as a coffee can brighten someone's day, or asking how their day is, or how someone's grandpa is, or like noticing when their kid gets to kindergarten. You know, we have like a weird hybrid bartender kind of role, and it's a privilege to be a part of so many people's lives. Okay, ready to move on to the next one? Perfect. Okay, I thought this was a perfect little gift that I found for working in a line. And so now we're going into optimizing bar flow. And so this is really important because it honestly, the biggest part is just avoiding burnout for you and your baristas. And when you're able to optimize bar flow, it's like more ergonomic, all the things that I have listed in this slide. And so we can just dive in. And so we talked a little bit about working in a line, but I think this little visual is like perfect for that. It's like from start to finish, you don't want to be going back over to point A to get back to point B. You know, it's like point A, point B, point C. That's kind of like how you want your building of drinks to go. I've worked in a lot of unorganized bar flows with extra steps and effort that weren't really necessary. And so I think, like, generally speaking, you start with a cup size, then espresso, then milk, and then topping, ice or garnish, etc. So I feel like that's, maybe your bar flow is probably different. Every cafe has a different bar flow, but just trying to think about it, like when you're visualizing your bar flow, trying to think of it as much as possible where it can work in that line. So it goes from point A to point B and then it's finished. Prioritizing efficiency over speed. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier as well, but it's just like efficiency over speed, less mistakes, less spills, less remix. It's really easy to want to like crush that rush as fast as possible. But maintaining quality control is better for you in the long run. Repeated experiences from guests also allows your employees to make sure that like their product is consistent. But yeah, batching movements, like prepping multiple milk pitchers at once, even if you don't have another drink ticket, pulling another shot while you're at espresso because there's already another person behind that person, so you know you're probably going to have to make another latte. And so say you get 3 espresso tonics, you should ice all 3, tonic all 3, and then espresso all 3. So trying to think about that as much as possible is like, what movements can I batch? Because that will make it more higher quality and also consistent as well. Making every movement count. Kind of similar to what we talked about a little bit about, like going when you go out there to get the bus bin, filling someone's water, stuff like that. So it's like if you're going back to grab milk, you might as well grab some of the seasonal syrup, you know? And so like trying to less steps, but more meaningful trips to where you're needing to go. We're moving one of our cafes to a different location later this year because it's a little bit bigger, which is very exciting. But it's so funny. We have like 3 spaces, including the cafe, and we have like a little cart that we go in between those spaces. And it's so important to be like, okay, I have got to get everything all in one go so I don't have to go back and forth again. And so I think that mindset is definitely really helpful, even if you just have one space. Thinking about your bar flow in terms of what is easiest on your body is like definitely great for the long term, especially because we're like, we want career baristas, like we want people to be career coffee professionals. And so, you know, kind of again, that like theme of like avoiding burnout. But I also think that like specialty coffee is awesome. Like we're always thinking of new gadgets every year. Sometimes they're a trend, sometimes they're really meaningful. But I honestly like the easiest one I can think of was distribution and tamp tools. You know, like I remember when I was first a barista, it was like we thought we had to be like with the tamper, you know, and really it's just like just a little loop, you know. And so I feel like distribution tools, tamping tools, I've even seen things that are like for the steam wand that are like specifically made to like fit on the steam wand, so it's just like an easy wipe. But yeah, always be thinking, and that's why like going to like you know SCA and different things like that and seeing what's out there for tools, I think is really important. It's like important that we're always growing and trying to, especially because we work in a physical field, and so we really want to be able to work somewhere that people are not feeling like they're really sore or really burnt out, you know. And then for bar rotations, I feel like I have worked so many places where it was like, all right, you're going to be on espresso bar for your whole shift. And it's exhausting. And so implementing bar rotations is super helpful. So kind of thinking of it in terms of like starting at the easiest position and then ending up at the hardest position. And then after you're done with the hardest position, you go on your lunch or your break. And so trying to think of it kind of like that cyclical movement. I really try not to keep anyone on any station for more than 2 hours. That's kind of like my limit. And that probably varies depending on your staff too. You know, like that depends on what location we are, but we usually only have the least amount of people we have is 3 or 4. So it's usually possible with that smaller amount. But even if you're like working with like 2 people, just like being intentional and being like, okay, like you're 3 hours, and then I'm 2 hours, you know what I'm saying? And then also too is just like making it for your staff being, you know, honest with each other, is being like, I can really only handle an hour on espresso bar today because I'm having a mental health day or something like that. So implementing bar rotations kind of already eliminates that because they know they won't be on that station for hours, you know? And then honestly, having whys, you know, is really important. I think it helps in the end for the barista to make sense. It's like if they know the why, it's going to be a lot more likely they'll be able to do it repeatedly, because they're like, okay, I understand this quality control issue is because, like, I guess a good example is like, I know not to put my portafilter roughly into the group head because I know it'll probably channel. And so I feel like giving it, like always trying to have a why, because it just like helps things make so much more sense, and also makes training a lot easier as well. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? Okay, perfect.
Wait, I have
Alrighty.
a question, and it might be,
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned maybe you'll have like a bringing on new baristas section. Is that coming up, or is now the time for that question?
It is coming up. Well, I have a whole section for hiring and coaching and developing as well.
Well, then I'm gonna save it till the end.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have this communication section. Like I was saying earlier, is like this is kind of just to outline a lot of like the very similar, or like a lot of the communication that we encounter in the cafe. And then as we go into these other slides, you'll see a lot of the examples of these types of communication. And so I just like, whether it's with your baristas, your boss, or your guests, clear communication is necessary to run a successful day in the cafe. And so I feel like there's like 4 that I feel like you use probably the most. And so, so like the first one is proactive versus reactive. And so no one likes surprises. Well, I guess some people do, but usually not at work. So communicating before an event arises that needs problem solving allows us to be in a less stressed mindset. Communicating before things actually become problematic. So I had some examples for like reducing hours. Say we're hitting the slow season and you're gonna have to like cut down 5 people, the 5 day a week people to 4 days just temporarily until it pops back up. Having that conversation with your employees before the schedule gets published is always going to be a go over better, because it's not necessarily, it's just that it's a surprise. It's not even necessarily that like they're super worried about wages. Some may be, and they'll be able to, that's the other thing too, is some may be worried about their wages. And if you have the conversation with them before publishing the schedule, you can then problem solve that and be like, okay, like I'm going to work on finding you a 5th day because this is really important. And so I feel like that's a really good, that's a good way of being more proactive versus reactive. Let's see. And then guess, kind of like we talked about earlier, is like being proactive and being like, this is where your lid is. This is where the condiment bar is. This is where the water is. Like having those conversations before it happens is really proactive way of like saving you time and having to have multiple conversations as well. Another thing too is like just being honest and checking in with your coworker. Say they're missing things on bar and they're distracted, being like, would you like me to steam this milk for you? Would you like me to split these shots for you? It's just like being able to like get to that before, so you can be in a little bit more of a supportive role. So I feel like proactive communication helps in supportiveness and also just making sure things don't get to become a problem. And then collaborative. I think it's so important that baristas have a safe space to be able to like ask why, give suggestions. And so I think it's really important that we're more collaborative. Even if we're the owners, it's important to be able to talk through ideas and suggestions. So having the staff feel heard, but then also implementing the ideas they have is also encouraging a growth mindset, but also being like, we can all have good ideas. And it also gives you an opportunity as well to be like, this, I understand where you're coming from. I see the why, but I think because of our bar flow, we'll maintain it this way. But I'm thinking about this and this and this. And so it's just like I don't know, it's just it's more team oriented, less hierarchical, you know? And I think that helps people feel more ownership in their cafe as well. They're like, okay, like my opinion matters. So like they feel more invested in the end, which is what we want. And then de-escalating. And so this can be with your baristas, it can be with your guests, it can be with like, say you have like a community houseless person that you deal with, you know, it's just like there's lots of things, and it's really important that if someone comes at you with a lot of like escalation and energy, that we're not meeting them there. And it usually helps to just like try to stay calm. It's hard under pressure sometimes, but like trying to have a de-escalation kind of viewpoint and being like, okay, like, do you need anything? Like, do you need a cup of water? Do you want to go outside and talk? And just trying to like meet them not where their energy is, but being able to get them to come down and being like, we're just having a conversation, you know, like not a big deal. And then the last thing I had was curiosity and empathy. This year I've been trying a lot harder to lead with curiosity, and so just making much less assumptions. And I feel like every time I make an assumption, it never works out in my favor. And so, you know, asking why or how or what, and so I think leading with a curious thought before you have a super concrete one helps you get to your solution faster, and also helps that person be heard as well. And I think empathy kind of just goes hand in hand with that, because you're like, okay, I want to make sure that like I understand your viewpoint before I give you this feedback or something like that. I think it's important because there's been times that like I've like gone straight into feedback with people, and then after that we were able to like discuss and talk about what was actually happening, and what I saw was definitely different than what they had been encountering. And so I think it's just important to be always like have that like curious mindset and being like, okay, why did this happen, you know? Okay, so next we're gonna go into managing a workplace. So let me bring up my notes. So managing is hiring and training and developing, creating a positive environment through people management and administrative tasks. What percentage do you think these are at? Okay, you ready?
Well, is it? Oh,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
so I was trying to figure out if those were all what numbers we were guessing, like, but the breakdown.
So I'm sorry, I went to the next slide. And I could have been more clear about that. So it's out of 100, and so what this is kind of, and this also can vary, but I feel like through my experience, this is what has worked best for me as a GM. And so using 40% of your time hiring, training, and development, and then 50% of your time is just people management, creating a positive. What did you say?
Thanks.
What'd you say? Sorry.
I think it was a pocket dial.
Oh, okay, perfect. So 50% is people management, is just listening to people, talking, and that's everybody. That's guests, baristas, your coworkers, your boss. And so I feel like it has a lot to do with just managing people and figuring out where they're at. And we're humans, so we're complicated, you know? So it's a lot of time. And then this is especially a me thing, but I like to get admin done as fast as possible so that I can people manage. And so usually I would say 10 to 20% is going to be administrative tasks. Okay, so going into, we'll go right into hiring and developing. So we're building a team, thinking about who we want to hire, all those things. And so first, you need to understand what your store needs. Are you looking for a part-time person, a full-time person? Do you have the resources to train someone who has no coffee experience? Are you like in kind of same exact thing? Do we need someone with experience so that we can get that training going faster? Are you seeking someone career oriented? What's your cafe culture like? And so there's so many different variables and questions that goes into what our candidate and like what we're looking for. And so kind of going into that with experience, like, does experience matter? And so while it's awesome to have experienced people apply, experience doesn't always equal a love for hospitality, the ability to mesh with coworkers, or be willing to adapt to new recipes and standards than previous jobs. And so if you have a love for coffee and people, I feel like you can almost always train someone on bar. You can train them standards, you can train them your structured QC and everything. And so I think, yes, it's amazing to get experienced people, but I feel like it shouldn't hold us back from investing in people who are new to coffee. And then also too, that goes hand in hand with that first question is like, do you have the time and the resources to train someone who's never been in coffee before? And that's a question you have to be real with, you know, because sometimes I have that point where I was like, no, it's the summer. I need someone now, you know? And so I think those are kind of the questions that we're looking for. And so finding talent. This all depends on where you are. You know, like when I was managing in Marin, just north of San Francisco, much harder to find people who are interested in coffee as a career, much harder to find people who like it isn't just their first job. And so it all depends on where you are. But how do we find these people? And what about the greater coffee community? Like if people from other shops that you know apply, like what is the right thing to do in that, you know? And so I definitely think it's just like word of mouth from my baristas has been really successful. Taking referrals, I feel like that's one of the best ways I've gotten to find good people. Um, and then also too, I've got to say, I feel like LinkedIn is becoming much more of a resource for baristas and the coffee community in general. I used to like never see barista jobs on LinkedIn, and you definitely see a lot more now as well. And then yeah, just as like it's sometimes you get resumes and you're not 100% sure. The worst that happens is you take a phone call with them and can figure out if they're not the right person. Um, but I feel like this has kind of been that's kind of how I found a lot of people is through my employees, and I will say employees who are doing well. And then so we found someone who seems like a good fit. What's the next step? So, my usual process is I usually schedule a phone call with someone first just to like get an idea for what they're looking for, what if we align on things. And I honestly love open-ended questions about just like what's your coffee journey? And you can ask that of someone who has never been in coffee before, because if they love coffee, they definitely have like probably their first coffee story where it was like the thing that made sense or the pour over they had. And so it's just like I love hearing about those passionate things that people have gone through with coffee. You know, everybody's story is different. Um, and so open-ended questions help the conversation flow really naturally. You want to make them feel comfortable so that they can be themselves. And that can be for both in a negative or positive way. It's just like you want to have a candid conversation with them, get them talking, and asking those open-ended questions. And then, like, I also like to ask, what makes you a good hospitality professional? Because it definitely is like it's an open-ended question and just gives them an opportunity to say why, and I think it's nice to say hospitality as opposed to service, because in specialty we're definitely looking for that like higher functioning level of service. And so asking them that like straight and direct question, I think helps a lot. It's also necessary to ask the basics, you know, do you want full-time? Do you want part-time? Can you work at least one weekend day? What is your availability? Like say they're in school. And so I usually leave those questions for the end, and like I like to do some of the more fun questions at the beginning. Any questions about interview questions? Okay, perfect. Or sorry, go ahead.
When you're kind of going back to the de-escalation and like reading rooms, if you find someone is like challenging, or if they're feeling nervous, or it's like not an immediate like you're vibing, what are some of your tips for somebody that made it to interview and then you're like, oh, this is going strange?
That's a great question, and it's definitely happened to me as well. And I think trying not necessarily simplifying, but if they seem nervous or seem like they're having like a harder time, I think going back to kind of like the basics, you know, like why do you want to work in this coffee shop, you know? And I think also knowing when to wrap up an interview if it's not going well as well. And so like, because we are very busy, and so if you know someone's not vibing right and you know they're not the right person, being able to be like, okay, like this sounds good. And then I always end interviews if they have any questions for me, because I think a lot of those questions will say a lot about them as well. But so I always like wrap it up and be like, okay, that's all for me. Do you have any questions? And then if they don't have any questions, I always give them, I always tell them I will let them know either way, and then give them a timeline. And so then they at least like, they're not waiting, they're not messaging you, they're not like hoping they're going to get a call back. And so I always try to follow that up and being like, okay, like I have a few more interviews I'm going to wrap up. And so after, I'll let you know either way in a week. If you have any questions before then, just shoot me an email. So it's like, so they at least, you don't want them to feel like you're blowing them off, you know? And so it's like, I think it's important to be like kind of ended that way. But yeah, if it's not going well and you can tell that like it's not vibing right, it's totally okay to end that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so going into to stage or not to stage. I feel like there's some skepticism about it, because a lot of times it ends up too long, it feels like free work. And so I think it's, if you do a stage, it's really important to have like very specific things you want to work on with them. I think it's also important not to just like throw them onto the bar, because it's not something you want for your guest. It's also not something you don't want to like put them that under that high pressure of an environment. And so some rules I follow when I do a stage is they should never be longer than an hour. I think especially because of that like free work type of thing, we don't want to like, we want to respect their time, you know. They should be given specific tasks with specific instructions. I honestly like stages more than anything, because I like to just see if they listen and can then put that into action. And so it gives me a good understanding of like how well they will train if they're able to pick something up after I've explained it to them. Using this time to explain hang on, what time? Oh my God, is it almost already an hour? I just realized that. Okay, I gotta go fast. This is so funny. I was like, it's gonna be 40 minutes at most.
Also, we can hang out, like if Debbie has to hop, we love having this as like a resource that we can go back to. So if you don't have a hard stop, I'm happy to stay here with you so you can finish all of your beautiful preparation with us.
Okay, that sounds good. Perfect. And okay, so going back to staging, using this time to explain our bar flow, what our expectation is, and then letting them do small tasks. A lot of times I almost spend, I always do a stage for my final part of an interview, just because I think it's really important that they're able to take feedback in the moment. And so I always mostly spend the time on back bar. I like grind some beans, show them how to use like dosing bells, and then I will almost always have them steam milk. Mainly not because I'm like, I want them to be a latte artist, but mainly because I'm like, this is how to use our steam wand. And if they are able to listen to that and make good milk, I feel like they'll train really well too. And so those are kind of the things I use when staging. And then structure for training is definitely really, really important. It helps quality control if it's consistent between everybody. Being able to provide a timeline for the noobs as well. So if you're like, this is how our scheduling usually goes, you'll be in a shadow from this week to this week, and then after that you'll be on your own. And so trying to make that as standardized as possible is really helpful. And then always be hiring. And that doesn't mean bringing on people all the time. It just means always be looking. So like if you get a really good resume, you are a little bit overstaffed, you should still interview that person just in case. Because chances are, I bet you someone is like, something is going to happen in their life in a month. And, I have a pregnant employee, she's about to leave. So it's like, you never know. Things like that, things happen all the time. And so it's always to be looking for excellent people rather than be looking for a body. You know what I mean? Okay, any questions before I go into the next section? Okay, perfect.
I was curious, and this might be, no, I think this is where you're, no, go ahead. I think I still need to save it till the end. Wait till you're done. Sorry.
And you're welcome. You can always ask questions. It's okay. I'll go through this and then feel free to ask after. Okay, so developing your baristas. So you got them. Now what do we do? You know what I mean? And so this is definitely one of my favorite things. I love to help people find out that they love coffee and get better. Spending time with people and getting to them is definitely one of my favorite things. And also taking the time to develop your baristas reaps benefits for both the business and also the barista. Helps you retain your staff, so less turnover, which in the end is more beneficial for the business, less money spent on training and stuff like that. And then it also helps your staff, so they don't feel stagnant or undervalued. And it helps the business because it creates better and more consistent quality and service, which equals repeat guests. And so I'm going to go through these specifically in each slide. So the first thing we'll go over is coaching. And so coaching the moment. Sometimes it's hard to have these conversations because we're in like the middle of a rush and stuff like that. But coaching the moment definitely has a higher success rate. And it gives them the opportunity to put what you immediately into practice. And so I feel like that's kind of like the why thing. If they have the why, they'll be able to understand why they need to do it. But yeah, so for coaching, I just said, you can't be mad at your baristas if they haven't been taught or given the chance to prove that they can accomplish something you coach them on. And so when coaching and thinking about feedback, you always want to ask if they've been trained on this before. And if they have they done it successfully? If they have done it successfully before, then they need to be held accountable and be reminded of their expectations. And if they haven't done it before, they probably need guidance to get to, for you to observe why they don't do that action in the moment. And so this is kind of, hilariously enough, I think Banana Republic taught me that when I worked there. But it's just like, it helps you figure out, okay, which direction do I need to go in? And so It's also really important that coaching is done in a timely manner to maintain that relevance, which is why coaching in the moment is so beneficial to cafes and like kitchen environments. So coaching in the moment, when delivered in a clear and kind manner, can be wildly successful. It gives that relevant feedback, immediately turns it into action. It also can help lighten the mood. It makes it less like corrective action and more like growth mindset. And so like a good example of this is like, I want my baristas to be able to look at me and be like, hey, Meg, your milk is a little bit thin the past 2 drinks. And I'll be like, perfect. Let me make an adjustment. Let me know if it's better. And so, simple, concise, not personal, and just like straight to the point. It helps in the moment. And also, if you're able to create that kind of culture of feedback in your store, it'll be really normalized as well. And then like trying to have like that less hierarchical environment just encourages more collaboration and more ownership. And then a lot of in my interviews, I also always ask people how they feel about getting feedback after they have finished their training, because I think that's important, like that growth mindset where it's like if you're continuing to get feedback after you have been fully completed training, like that can be discouraging to some people. But I also think it's important to like, we have such a obsession, I feel like, with perfectionism in our society. And so it's kind of something we have to break ourselves up and being like, I'm not perfect and that is okay. And if I mess up, that's a learning experience. It doesn't mean I'm a bad barista, And honestly, I think that's something I'm still learning too. So I think we all have to be merciful to ourselves, But I put this quote on here, and it's a quote from my store manager at the first Starbucks I ever worked at. And he was like, being great isn't about being perfect, but being able to stop when you know you can do better. And it just like resonated with me, and I feel like I still have it in my head sometimes. Like going back to the milk steaming thing, it's like I steam milk, I know it's probably acceptable, but there's a little bit more bubbles than I want. Like I'm going to start over because I'm going to get that perfect milk for this customer. That's kind of a dramatic example, but I feel like that kind of thing is like being able to stop and be like, no, I'm going to like make sure this is just the way I want it. Okay, so then going into reviews and raises. And so I think it's really important that, it's really important that we do reviews. We're so busy as managers, owners, leads, baristas, but it's important to prioritize a structured check-in with your staff at least once a year. And so making it simple on yourself. So what parameters are most important to you? Go simple. Bar flow, QC, hospitality. And then also basic requirements like timeliness, ability to work with everybody, so like their team dynamic. And so if you're like just coming up with a review program, start simple. You can always go broad and then give them specifics. The other thing that's really important is I think it's really, I feel like to make sure everybody feels heard, it's really good to have employee have a safe space. And so this gives you an opportunity to like sit down in a room alone and talk to them and be like, what are your questions, comments, concerns? Like, what do you want to work on this quarter? And so it gives them another way to be collaborative. And then also, the more often reviews happen, the more clear your expectations are. And so honestly, I said at least one sit down structured check-in a year, but I think that like at least two is very beneficial for the employee and also yourself. Things get left to the wayside. We're super busy. And so it's really easy just to be like, I'm just going to do it once a year. But it's worth it in the long run. And then you can also use this time reviews to work on bar flow stuff. So you can like workshop stuff and being like, hey, like You need help with your positioning on milk. Let's work on that today because it's like after close, or you have like a back bar you can work on. But like you can make it super interactive. There's so many, you can be super creative with reviews. And then it's important to have your baristas trust and hear them out, even if it's not something that you'll necessarily implement. And you should always provide the why for them. And so reviews are also a good experience for them to like bring up those ideas as well. Doing reviews is a lot of work. It takes year-round work to be able to do them in a timely way. And so I definitely understand. I do quarterly reviews and also raises. And it's like every time I turn around, I'm like, oh my God, I got to start these reviews again. But that time that I get with the employees where I like sit down and talk, it's just like, you can see the immediate feedback being then put into action as well. And it's just like, it's just so nice to know where you're at, you know? And then let's see, it's also a great opportunity to give positive affirmations, and then raises should also accompany the reviews when they're meeting expectations or exceeding expectations. And so I feel like giving employees raises every review they're meeting expectations helps you keep up with inflation. It also shows them that you value their work and their dedication to the cafe. I also always let my employees negotiate for a higher pay rate if they feel they have exceeded expectations. And so I feel like as a woman, I've negotiated for higher pay many times in my life, and I just feel like it's an indispensable tool. And so a lot of times my employees, they'll come up to me and they're like, I think I would like to have more than this. And they know now if they ask that, they have to come with a reason. Like they have to come with a list to be like, these are the things I accomplished this quarter, and this is why I think I deserve this raise. And sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But I think it's really a really good, if they go on to bigger and greater things than Coffee Movement, this gives them the strength to then have that conversation with someone that's a little bit more difficult, you know? Okay. And then, so the last thing before we get into people management is inspiring your baristas. And so we've all had a boss that came in and did not know the best place to slide in and assist with the brush. And so I think it's really important to understand what our baristas deal with on a daily basis, especially during the high volume times. And so be able to crush the rush with them. I think it's really important. And I think going into that next point is leading by example as well. Is like, if you're able to crush the rush, if you're able to maintain that high quality during high volume times, they have something to look up to. And so you want to lead the way with how your QC and your hospitality should work in your cafe. You want to be a resource to your baristas and collaborate with them, letting them ask questions and having the why for them. And if you don't have a why, always following up with that why. And I know we've said this a few times, but I think it's so important to be able to like explain why we're doing what we're doing. Reviews are also a great time to discuss goals for your staff. What have they learned? What interests them? Where do they want to improve? So using that review to talk about what would inspire them helps you know this is the next thing I can start working on with them to help inspire them to their next step in their coffee career. And then growth opportunities. You know, as you grow as a business, you want to be able to delegate more work to your most skilled, giving opportunities to those who have potential. You can carve out roles like a bar lead, a store manager, assistant GM, events manager. So you can carve out specific roles to give them those growth opportunities. But you can also add responsibility to current roles as well to give them just like, so they're not stagnant. So they're trying something new. depending on the responsibility you're giving them, it should probably also come with a pay raise as well. But it depends, you know, like there's specific things that you can like it. I think a good example is like things like inventory are a great way to give off bar time to baristas without necessarily having to increase their wages. If they start ordering and doing other things like that after inventory, then that's probably like something that requires more of a raise. Team meetings are another way to gather and inspire, whether it's like a mandatory seasonal switch meeting or a workshop focusing on developing a cafe specific skill in your cafe. Last year I implemented, we do a 6-week meeting that is not a mandatory one, and it comes with a workshop after. And so while trying to figure out what these workshops we've been doing are, Reef and I, my partner and also one of the owners, have been working on like cafe specific stuff that's like specific to our cafe. So it just like helps them grow in their role, and also coffee as well. And then you guys know me, I love competition. Competition is a great way to inspire employees, whether they're competing, judging, volunteering, or just supporting your team. Meeting the greater coffee community is so beneficial to you and your staff. Competition gives baristas the chance to like really deep dive into a coffee and learn more about processing, coffee history, and how to be a better barista. It is an expensive sport, so it is important to have to carve a budget out and to have clear expectations for your baristas for what goes into training, and also them maintaining their quality at work. It's a lot of work, and so it's important that they like know that expectation that you're like, you still have to be your top player in the cafe while also training for this really rigorous competition. And so I think as long as it comes with some honesty and also a good sponsorship, I think that competition is an excellent way of just giving someone an opportunity to really learn about coffee. I love academia, and so I love competition for the research part. And so I feel like that's something that like a lot of baristas benefit from, is being able to be like, wow, this is like a crazy story about this coffee and this processing and all these things. I feel like competition can only help them learn and feel better and more in control of their barista skills. Okay. Now we're going, oh, okay, any questions before we move on to people management? Okay, perfect. People management. So first things first, the ebbs and flows of being a human. There are a lot of things that go into being a human, and we all have to work while we're going through these things. We know what the world is like. We know every day, everyone, including ourselves and our staff, are inundated by current events, personal happenings, and that's why it's important to be empathetic. When we think about misbehaving customers, we think you never know what someone's going through. And it's very much the same for our staff as well. We're just humans. We can hold people accountable for their actions, but also be understanding. I feel like a good example is like someone just went through a breakup, they had a family member die, they're just not having a good mental health day. Like these are the things you have to deal with on a regular basis when you manage a team. And so if someone calls out, it's important that if we run a skeleton crew, or that if we have to run a skeleton crew, that we make sure we're not rushing and being intentional. And so, sorry, I just got notification. Let me do not disturb now. And so it's just important, while all these things happen, it's important that we're there for our team, and that we realize that like, if we're short a person, we're gonna get through it. It's gonna be one drink at a time, instead of it feeling like there's pressure. Especially because like, say someone called out and then the other person that's with you is like a noob, And so being understanding for them and being able to hold your team is really important. It's important to set the precedence that we don't work ourselves into the ground and that we can make it through a difficult day and maybe leave a few minutes late, but know we did our best. And so I think people management is a lot of that, a lot of like making sure people are in a good headspace. So that being said, continuing this theme of leading with curiosity and active listening is really important. Having the patience to actively listen to our staff, and not assuming the why behind an action. It's easy to get those conversations started off on the wrong foot. So instead, like, this is what I observed. Why do you think that is? Leading it with that conversation and asking for the why from them as well. And then doing check-ins with people, who seem a little bit out of it, being like, hey, you seem a little bit off today, like, what's going on? And sometimes you have to actively listen to their personal problems, even though you're not their therapist. And sometimes they just need to be heard, and then they're able to move on. But I feel like that is a good example too of like, if someone comes in and they're having a bad mental health day, being able to be like, okay, how about we have you on back bar this time, and then I can cover your espresso time so that you don't have to talk, or your register time, so you don't have to like talk to customers the whole day. And I think that like it's important that we hold them accountable and be like, like, if this continues, we have to have a larger conversation, but being able to be understanding in that moment and know that, like, even for yourself, if there's a day where you need to delegate something, like, your team needs to be able to understand that, and so kind of going back into that, like, collaboration, team environment, less hierarchical. And then promoting a positive environment through action. These seem like really small things, but like smiling and greeting your staff when they come in. Smiling when you pass orders. I always look to them and like just a little smile. Leaving the space better than when you came in kind of mentality. And because if you do that, that helps them want to mirror that experience as well. And then delivering feedback in a clear and kind way, being like, not, not escalating. We're trying to de-escalate. And I think being clear and honest and to the point is probably the most successful way. But being a manager also means you have to know how each of your employees communicate, and you kind of cater it to each different person. And I think that's when you're really good at communication, you're able to do that. But also knowing that, like, being patient with ourselves and knowing that if we make a mistake with communication, that it's a learning experience rather than a failure. Okay, and then the last part of people management I wrote was handling the community and safety issues. So earlier we talked about de-escalating versus escalating, and that communication is especially important when dealing with the general public. Kind of like we were talking about, if someone's escalated, it's really important not to meet them at that same energy, since that's going to escalate the situation even more. Working in SF, we encounter a lot of houseless people and a lot of tourists, a lot of random people passing through. If you need to de-escalate a situation, trying to get that person outside to chat is usually the best option. There's a lot of stimulation going on in the cafe. There's music, there's people talking, a lot of things, and a lot of times it can make it a lot more chaotic. And so a lot of times I'll just be like, if someone comes in and they're loud and escalated, I'll be like, hey, like, can we go outside and talk? Can we just chat real quick? And that usually works. And a lot of times they usually will want to leave after that too. But then a lot of times you can also get to the point where they're like, I really want to water. They're a tourist where they have no idea where they're going and they had a bad experience and they're escalated. It's a lot easier to de-escalate if you're able to move that to an environment that's a little bit less overstimulating. And then this is also where clear and honest conversation comes in as well, like asking pointed questions like, is there something I can get for you? I'm sorry, we have to stay out of the cafe right now. I appreciate you, but like, keep telling me your problems. And it sounds condescending, but like trying to talk to them almost like a little kid. And not like, obviously not like, oh, honey, but just being like extremely simple with your language and also just like nice, kind eyes. This is also really hard to do sometimes when people are really escalated. But these are definitely things that have helped me a lot, and both with customers and just passerbys and just in general. And honestly, with your staff too, there's sometimes your staff gets escalated, they're frustrated, and it's important that you don't meet them with that same level of energy. Okay, being the best leader you can be. I think these are really important things that I feel like are really easy to just not even think about because we're so busy and we're just like, we have to get these things done right now, and I have to be the person that's getting it done. So if there's anything I've learned over the years as a mentally ill general manager at times, is taking the time and money to take care of your personal life. It's extremely important. Making lists, getting organized, you have to be the manager of your life and not only the cafe. And that's being an adult, and it's annoying sometimes. But otherwise, it's difficult to deal with your barista's ebbs and flows if you can't manage your own. And it's just like it also is a lifelong process. Learning to communicate, learning how to manage your emotions, being less reactionary, all those things take time. And so it's really important that we're merciful with ourselves and are just striving to be better. So we're all humans, so it is important to delegate and ask for help when needed to avoid burnout. You may feel like the glue to the cafe, and it probably is true, you are. But in the end, it's just a coffee shop, and we don't need to shoulder everything. I always tell my employees to be honest if they need to be in a different spot for the day, kind of like we were talking earlier, if they're having a bad mental health day. And I know I can rely on them for the same. And I think that's important. And then work-life balance. Taking time for self-care, making sure we take our full lunches and designated breaks. It's important. We want to avoid burnout. And it's so funny to be saying these things because these are definitely things I struggle with. Because I'm like, okay, I was like, I can count myself as 1.5 people. So if we're short, it's actually okay. And then I can just skip my lunch. We've all been there, but we want to try to avoid doing that. It's in the end, it's worth it. And honestly, if you're like, I'm going to take a 20-minute break instead of a 30-minute break, what's going to happen in those 10 minutes? You'll be okay. And kind of like we were talking about earlier, it's just like being merciful with ourselves, accepting mistakes as learning experiences and not failures. And then also like being humble and being able to take accountability if you do mess up. I've had those conversations. I've come back to an employee and been like, hey, I phrased this way and I don't really feel good about it. And I'm really sorry. And this is what I mean. And I will try to do better next time. Or not, I will. But I think it's important, and it shows that we're human and also allows them to be human and to realize like, I can try to be better at this too. And then the last thing I said is just making coffee fun. Making coffee is fun. And that I think, lightheartedness and QC can coexist. You can make the best coffee in your city and also have a great time. And I think that's something that I learned through competition as well, is just like I love competing and it's so much fun. And so I feel like work should also be fun. And we also want to maintain professionalism as well. And so like making sure we're not having fun at the sake of a guest, or making sure we're not like leaving a guest out of a conversation and stuff like that. But I think that life is short, and we live in this capitalistic society, so we might as well enjoy the jobs we're doing, you know? And then I was going to say for this, at the earlier start of this, I was going to say we have this question to ask, but I went over time. So, I would love to open the floor for any questions, comments, concerns.
I have a question that I feel like might be dated, and I'm so curious what you think about it because I've been off bar for a while. But I feel like in the years that I was in cafes, there was never an elegant solution that everyone could agree on about when you hire somebody, is everybody get to be a barista? How quickly do they get to be barista? I know you have like you're rotating through your couple of hours, and I really love that solution. Or like the territorial barista, which I think has gone a little bit by the wayside. Or the like, yeah, I think you understand the question, and I'm just curious what you think about all that.
Definitely. I think that well, first off, I think that having standardized training helps those things, because you're like, okay, everybody, no matter what their experience is, has to go through this training process. And so I think that does kind of help mitigate some of that if you have it really standardized. But the other thing too is almost every single time you finish someone's training, and they're not like say they're not a shadow anymore and they're a real body, there always goes through an adjustment period where they are not necessarily as strong as the rest of the team. And so I think that's kind of where when you're not there, you're leaving, and like being able to have a strong core leadership and being able to like know we need to pull this person off this part of bar now because it's just a little too crazy. And coffee movement, we normalize that too, so that like people don't feel like really sad. They're like, oh no, I just got pulled off a bar, I'm so embarrassed. And so we always tell them that like honestly, the first 3 to 6 months, if it's crazy and we just need to get our parameters up, because what I think that also helps too is like specific expectations. And so we're striving for like a minute per transaction. And so a lot of times when I poll people, I'm like, you were just dipping below the minute per person, and we got a line that's like super long, and so that's why I'm swapping you out. So giving them that why. But I think that and I totally understand the territorial barista thing, because I definitely was that person. And I'd be like, no one touched my bar, it's clean. And so I think that 2-hour rotation helps kind of mitigate that too. It's just like more team oriented and less like, this is me and I have to be at this station because I'm the best at this station. But yeah, I hope that helped at all. Do you have any other follow-up questions?
No, that made a lot of sense. I just was curious, one, if that still was a thing in bars, and two, like what your, I guess my one like feedback or like is, I think it's really lovely that you give everyone the same onboarding, and even if they have come to you with a lot of experience, because I think sometimes experienced baristas don't always get the same training,
Mhm.
and then I don't think like that's fair to them, but also it brings them into the fold in the same way, and then I think mitigates a lot of maybe old behaviors.
Definitely. And as I feel like that it was kind of a humbling experience for me, because when I started working at Coffee Movement, I had just gotten 4th in the US, and I just started working weekends with them. And I went through the same kind of training in the shadows I had, and it was just like, and I just got hired as a barista right away, and not as the GM. And I worked as a weekend barista for 6 months, like making sure I was really good on bar flow before they offered me that position. And so I feel like that is like, that doesn't always happen. And so many times in my career, it's been like, okay, you have experience. Here you go. There you go. Bye. You know? And so I think it's really, it helps to maintain that like consistency, you know?
Well, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful, really verdant, really, I think also evergreen. Like everything you said doesn't go out of style. Like it's just true.
100%. 100%. Thoughtful, top to bottom, inside and out. Yeah. Thank you, Meg.
Yeah. This is so funny. I was like, oh my God, I talked for an hour and a half.
Well, nobody's making you say time, you know? Like take your time, damn it.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very, very much. Very valuable. Very valuable and specific advice, you know, so that's always really, really helpful. Thank you so much for your time. Well, am I jumping ahead at all, or is this the
This is the end.
oh amazing. Deb, did you have any questions? Any wrap up?
No, you guys covered so much. I took so many notes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Have a really beautiful rest of your afternoon, your evening, and happy March, y'all. Thank you so much for taking us through all these aspects of what makes a really great workplace and in person and all your experience and competition and how all of that has built over these years and into this